Provide a quick summary of a lot of the key concepts for graphing sine and cosine functions. We're going to summarize our general purpose equation very quickly one more time. Then we're going to go ahead and do a few things. We're going to build a relatively complicated formula. We're going to go ahead and graph. We're going to look at a graph and turn it into a formula. And then finally, we're going to take a word problem and build a formula or an equation representation for periodic movement. We'll start with our general purpose equation, as you see, y equals plus or minus a, and then we'll have either the sine or cosine function. So the sine and cosine of angle B times, in parentheses, t plus or minus c, close bracket. That's the angle that we'll be doing, plus the value of d. And let's talk through what all these pieces do. Plus or minus controls my drawing pattern. Positive sine, positive cosine, negative cosine, and we've talked before about the drawing patterns. Where do you start? Where do you go to? So on and so forth amongst the mid, max, and min. We're not going to belabor that, but just remember, drawing pattern. Your value of A will control, just like A stands for, the amplitude. How far above from the midline you go, how far below from the midline you go in absolute terms. Remember, A, all these pieces, A is always going to be a positive number. Next, D, because I want to handle all the vertical pieces. D controls the midline. Where do I put the midline of my graph? And then what do you know? Midline plus amplitude equals max. Midline minus amplitude equals min. So we got all the vertical pieces handled. The value of B is going to control your period for these two functions in the following way. 2 pi divided by b gives you your new period. And finally, the value of c gives you your start or start draw point. I like to use this because, again, we always look at 0 to 2 pi as being the basic picture window that we use when we're drawing the general purpose, the parent sine and parent cosine. So the value c plus c means shift to the left by c from 0. Start at negative c, so to speak, where you draw your graph. If you see t minus c, shift to the right by whatever value c is, and that's where you'll start drawing your graph. In other words, where your period starts. What else do you know? If you start drawing at whatever your value of c is, plus or minus, what do? Your end drawing point is whatever the length of the period is. So this is going to give you a good way to look these through. So let's take a look at an example. F of t equals negative 45, the sine of t minus pi over 8 plus 12. So here we go. Let's go ahead and build this. D, midline. As soon as I know my midline, I'll go ahead and mark it. It's at 12. The dashes are just to help me. It's to provide symmetry. Remember, up and above the midline. So it's just also going to help me as I start to dot things up. My amplitude is 45. Hey, 12 up 45, I'm going to be at 57. Let me just stretch this a little bit while I got the chance. And 12 minus 45 would take me down to negative 33. We'll put that about right there. Might not be perfect from a symmetry standpoint, but that's what we'll work with. All right, what else do I have? Well, nice in this case. So let's do a little wrinkle to this problem. Let me go ahead and change this. I want to make this sine of 2 times t minus pi over 8. You'll see why. With a value of 2 now, I am going to impact my period. B equals 2. My period is going to equal 2 pi over 2 or pi. So that knows from wherever I start to draw and where I finish to draw, they're going to be separated by a distance of pi. Minus pi over 8. What's that telling me? Shift your start draw point to the right. I'm going to start drawing at t equals pi over 8. Comes a tick mark. By the way, you should notice my y-axis is already good. I've started to build my t-axis as well. Hey, where am I going to finish? Well, my period is equal to pi. So pi over 8 plus pi, 9 pi over 8 is where I'm going to finish drawing. Now, I'm going to put 3 more ticky marks in because remember, we kind of go through a pattern, we kind of connect. Our graph's going to have 5 points in it. Should have done this earlier, but it's okay. Doesn't matter what order I do these, just as long as I get it. What do I have? I have a negative here. I'm going to have the negative, so I'm going to write neg sine pat. And the nice thing about the sine pattern is, well, it starts at the midline, finishes at the midline. So at least I know, here's my midline at pi over 8. I know I'm going to finish at 9 pi over 8. We'll fill these in just a little bit. But the negative sine pattern, well, what way does it go? This is where just knowing these patterns is going to really, really help you out. The negative sine pattern starts at the midline and goes down first. So I'm going to go on my next ticky mark. I'm going to hit at negative 33. I'm going to return to my midline at my next, and I'll get up to my 57 value. So I'm going to just kind of right over where I have myself. And there is my pattern for this problem. And that's the period I would repeat over and over again. By the way, one nice thing, hey, these are equal intervals. I have 4 equal intervals. The distance that they run is just one period, which happens to be pi. So my little ticky mark, I'll call it ticky mark size, is how much? Well, I got 4 of those that run over a total distance of pi. Each ticky mark is pi over 4. And by the way, since I'm speaking in eighths for a lot of what I have, why don't I just turn this into 2 pi over 8? What's that help me with? Labeling the rest of my axis. Add 2 pi over 8. There's a 3 pi over 8, followed by a 5 pi over 8, followed by a 7 pi over 8. So hopefully that helps you, just seeing the basics or whatever. Sorry that I kind of threw a curveball here just after we started, but again, just to make this more complicated, I want to have legit values of all A, B, C, and D. I didn't want to have any of those equal to 1 or 0. I wanted them all to come into play. But that's how I can build a graph very, very quickly. So let's look at something different. On this page, as I flip over, I have a graph. And I'm going to start trying to figure out what I have. It looks like I have a midline at 13. D equals 13. What pattern do I see? I'm starting at a max. I'm finishing at a max. That's a positive cosine pattern. That's helpful. Can I figure out my midline is 13, my max is 55. How far apart are they? They're separated by, that looks like, last time I looked, 42. Looks like my amplitude equals 42. And by the way, if I go down 13, I'd be at negative 29. Again, maybe not quite to scale here, but just so that we can see the different numbers, just so we got it. What else do I notice? I run from pi over 2 to 9 pi over 2. My period equals pi. And what do we know? Period equals 2 pi over b. We said pi. Pi equals 2 pi over what? B must equal 2. So we kind of repeated ourselves here from our other example, but that's okay. B equals 2. And by the way, what do we notice? My start drawing point is what? At pi over 2. We've shifted to